represents the numbers that we have available just for this year. So in that middle column here, you see our fiscal year 25 goal. So this is a regional goal that is really set by the county. So each county every year develops a work plan that's actually for the next year that are actually due here in the next month, where they tell us what is their goal that they're going to reach for each of these service areas. And then in that third column here, you see the progress that we've made through June. So overall, as you see here, we are doing pretty good. We are over halfway of the goal for the fiscal year for permanent supportive housing placement and also the homeless prevention goals that we've set. And with the new data that we have available in our quarterly report template, we are also just this quarter able to have valuable insights on the amount of population A and B households in each of these interventions. And our, especially since we have the data now available for our shelter units, we're able to see how population A households are moving through the system in a much more intentional way than we ever could before. Next slide.
I'm sorry. Another clarification question. Shelter units, do you have a utilization rate?
We don't.
Building shelter beds or shelter units is a necessary step. You can't put someone in it until it's there. But having spent money to do that, it's important for us to know whether they're being utilized.
Yeah, so we don't track shelter utilization. That's not a data point that we're collecting right now in our reports. I know that the 3 counties collect that and all 3 of them differently report that on their websites. However, when we've asked that question of shelter of the counties, they have all confirmed that their shelter utilization rates are quite high and are consistently being used, but we can certainly follow up with the counties and get the most up-to-date shelter utilization rates. But at this point, it's not a data point that we're collecting.
If they know enough to know they're high, they should know enough to know the numbers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to ask just a sort of a follow-up on that question. Can you provide, or is there more information on providing shelter units is a broad category. It includes emergency shelters. My understanding is that we didn't have enough emergency units during some of the cold weather. It also includes long-term specialty, whether it's for, domestic violence shelters, youth shelters, and so forth. So this number as it is, can you unpack that a little bit more and give us an idea of where we are on those different categories?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we're currently collecting the data, no, in the report. You are absolutely correct, though. These shelter units fund a variety of shelter interventions from youth to family DV.
And are Safe Rest Villages considered shelters?
Yes, I believe that that's how they are currently being rolled up into this number.
So this includes Safe Rest Villages, emergency shelters, and so forth?
Okay. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. There's a lot of variability in shelter capacity, different places and different kinds.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. And I will note that as we are working to finalize the data sharing agreement that we presented on a couple of weeks ago, the level of detail that you're requesting, we'll be able to answer that much more thoroughly with that data sharing agreement.
Thank you.
You go to the next slide. So this slide, I'll pivot over now to start talking at a really high level the performance that we've seen for each county and then some of the highlights that they have shared with us. So in this slide here, it's a replication of the previous slide. It's just specific to Clackamas County, the goals that they set for and their quantitative goals, and then where they're at in achieving that goal. So as you see here, Clackamas County has already met at least 2 of these goals. They have nearly reached their rapid rehousing annual goal. And as in previous years, these rapid rehousing services are targeting much needed services for women. Additionally, as we're seeing in the shelter data that they presented to us, almost 2/3 of the people that they're serving in shelter identify as population A. We are excited to be able to track now that we're getting this data on how these households are maybe perhaps moving from shelter to some of these other housing interventions. And if we go to the next slide. So in addition to the quantitative goals that each county sets in their work plan, there's also what we call qualitative goals in different areas, including capacity building, racial equity, and provider capacity. So in Q2, Clackamas County reported to us that they have met all of these goals that they have set around their own annual capacity building goals. So a quick overview of them is that they have been able to implement the 1115 demonstration waiver, also known as the Medicaid waiver out in our community. This has allowed Clackamas County to build a system where they can leverage Medicaid funding to pay for housing for applicable participants. So this is a really great example of how we are bringing together different systems of care to ensure that we are funding and providing the best housing services available for people. Another thing that Clackamas County achieved this quarter was that they were able to pilot a new health case conferencing system tailored to improving access to housing for specific populations with complex health needs. So these would be like seniors that are 65 years and older, individuals with behavioral health needs, and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So by piloting this new case conferencing, which is really a meeting where multiple parties come in to talk about a household and their needs ahead of getting them connected to services, they were able to are seeing success and being able to connect them into services much more intentionally. Additionally, Clackamas County, as you know, is a funder and funds service provider. So they had a goal to further build out their compliance and quality improvement function. So some of the things that we are tasked to do, like things like monitoring and checking in on reportings and quality improvement, they are continuing to build out those functions themselves for the service providers that they are funding. Next slide. So this next slide here provides an overview of where Multnomah County is in terms of meeting their quantitative goals. As you can see here, they have had really great success in their shelter units and being able to build and sustain the shelter units that they said that they would. As you can see here, they are 64% of their goal in terms of meeting permanent supportive housing and are over halfway for rapid rehousing in their eviction prevention goal. Multnomah County continues to prioritize racial equity in the work that they're doing, with Black, Indigenous, and people of color households receiving a large proportion of the services that SHS pays for. If you go to the next slide. In October, Multnomah County had a grand opening for the new Marie Equi Center in Portland's Brooklyn neighborhood. This day center provides drop-in health and housing services to the LGBTQIA2S+ community. The center is receiving over $800,000 of Metro SHS dollars for the day center this fiscal year. And this new center really aligns with the priorities that Multnomah County has set forth in their local implementation plan as a response to the Metro SHS work plan to ensure that we are continuing to expand the capacity of partners to offer culturally specific services and by increasing the behavioral health resources available in our system. So it was a really great event. Our director was there that day to speak, and I know that a lot of members of the community are really excited to have this resource here in the Portland metro area.
What's its capacity?
It does a couple of different things, given that it's a day center. I don't know off the top of my head the exact numbers, but I don't believe that they've reached capacity and have been able to serve people coming in through.
I just hope it can serve the whole region, that
Yeah.
it's big enough until we have others like it around the region.
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
What's the staffing of the Equi Center?
Yeah, I would have to double check, but I know I toured the center myself and they walked me through at a really high level. They had directors, they had outreach staff there, housing navigators. I couldn't tell you exactly how many staff, but they had an array of staff that provide support in different ways. Next slide. Yeah, so I will round out my part of the presentation by providing quick updates on Washington County and how they are doing. So you see here how they're doing in terms of their permanent supportive housing goal, over halfway, kind of right where we would expect to see them, 2 quarters in. As you can see here, the rapid rehousing placements are a little under where we would normally see them halfway through the year. And after checking in with them, they have shared with us that they had a couple new programs for rapid rehousing that they have just not been able to like launch in the way that they expected. So we've been talking with them through some of their strategies for how they are planning to do that and provide more support to these providers given that this is a new program. And yeah, and as you can see here, they're almost halfway through reaching their homelessness prevention goal. Next slide. Some of these Washington County program highlights that they shared in their Q2 report is that they have successfully met one of their goals under capacity building by opening one of the first 3 that they're planning on purpose-built shelters, and this opened in Beaverton. So the shelter received $4.8 million in SHS funding for construction and $1.9 million of ongoing SHS funds for site operations. So this new space provides 60 beds of congregate shelter with trauma-informed design and a dedicated coordinated space for addressing healthcare related needs on site. Additionally, another highlight from these 2 quarters was that Washington County funded the capital development of 119 transitional housing units at 2 locations in partnership with Central City Concern and Transcending Hope and the county's behavioral health division. So these units funded will provide recovery, transitional housing, and stabilization recovery designed to support people with acute behavioral health needs. With that, I will pass it over to RJ to walk us through a financial overview for the 2 quarters.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll start with the tax revenue through Q2 of fiscal year 25. With the fall 2024 tax revenue forecast, it's predicted now to be about a 14% reduction from the original budget forecast for fiscal year 25. As you can see, the actuals are $69.1 million. We are before the high point of tax season, so there's a lot of variability that will happen. So I think this will be more accurate in the forecasting once we get through April 15th and onward. Next slide, please. Tax collection costs are forecast to be around 3%, which has been similar in other years. Currently, it's 4.6 million, but we do forecast that it will be the full 11.1. Next slide, please. The Metro administrative for fiscal 25 forecasting is going to spend potentially 67% of the fiscal year adopted budget, which does include that 3.2 million in contingency, which is the green top metric. Again, forecast is going to really be dependent on what happens in April and the high point of tax revenue collection. So we'll have more and better accurate forecasting once we get those data filing or the filing data and actual payments. Next slide, please. So for county administration, Metro recommends that counties not exceed 5% of program revenue. This graph shows where they're currently at as a percent of their total programmatic costs. All of them are under the 5% mark, but do bear in mind that this does not include the CBO or the service providers administrative rates or the regional long-term assistance ARLA voucher administrative rates. Just due to timing differences, that metric will be collected at the end of year report. Next slide, please. So now we'll go county by county just to see where they are on their spend down plan. These are cumulative and they exclude built infrastructure. So for Clackamas County, you can see in green is their fiscal year 25 spend down plan, and in orange are their actuals. They're a little under, but they're still on target. And again, once we get more data towards Q3 and end of year, we'll get a better picture of where they're going to land. Next slide, please. Same goes with Multnomah County. They were a little over in Q1 and just a hair over in Q2. So they're right on target what they were potentially planning to spend for fiscal year 25 in actuals. Next slide, please. And I'll end with Washington County. where there's a little variability, where they were a little over 6 million over on their spend down plan in Q1 and a little under 7 million underspent in Q2. But again, the variability of this will balance out when we get more data in Q3 and Q4. Next slide. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're here to answer any questions. We also might have some friends that join us depending on the type of questions that you ask us today.
Thank you, Yesenia and RJ, counselors. Any further questions? Counselor Nolan.
Functional zero, where is that on our measurements?
So functional zero really speaks to our inflow and outflow data that we have available. So those are because of the way that that data is collected and the amount of time that we need, you will see that those metrics around, and not that it's functional zero per se, but like the data that we're seeing around the people of households needing the services and how we are then reporting our outflow, the number of people that get housed, you see that data presented in our annual report. So in the regional report that I presented last week, you'll see where we're at in terms of that inflow to outflow. As we shared last week, what we are currently seeing in the data is that for every 10 households that we support with housing placements, 15 new households are entering the system. So we're not anywhere near at this point in time in reaching functional zero, but that is the closest way at this point in time that we have to be tracking towards that.
So if we're not anywhere near functional zero and not heading there, if that gap is widening, at what point, and this is not necessarily a question for you, but for the region, at what point do we say this path is not getting us to what the voters expect from us, which everybody I hear from says is, they don't use the word functional zero, but that's what they mean. And at what point do we say, let's look at the specific tactics and programs that counties are using and really get into the meat of which of them are working, they're effective and efficient, they're using the dollars available most efficiently, and maybe double, triple, quadruple up on those and back away from programs that are really, really expensive and have very low success rates. And Yesenia, I don't know, maybe it's not a rhetorical question. It's one that I think we need to answer. I don't know if this is the venue, but at some point soon, I really am pushing that we address that question.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan, and I'll let you speak in a second. Patricia, I totally agree, and I think that that's definitely the goal of many of our conversations is to understand what's working, what isn't.
Right.
I think the other thing, I mean, every time I've heard that number, we solve it for 10 people and 15 more people come in. What is driving that number? What is happening to those folks? What are they experiencing that is having them enter the system? I think we really need to understand that as well. And I don't know if we have any data on that currently, but if we do, I think that would be helpful for everyone.
I agree, we need to understand that. I also want to know if that's an anecdotal number, 15 to 10, or if it's an empirical number that we have.
It's empirical. I'm getting
Replicable data.
head nods from this smart folks.
Empirical.
It's empirical.
Okay.
Just Patricia Rojas, she, her pronouns, housing director for Metro. I appreciate the question because it is exactly the kind of next step on the data side that we need to take, is to understand how we are doing in moving towards functional zero, because that is the goal. And in order for us to understand that, it goes beyond getting the PIC count and understanding some very basic numbers. We have to do some evaluation. And so at that point, that is really one of the areas with this reform that we are insisting that we need to move towards, is evaluating the data so that we can have some conclusions around the dynamics that are leading to these PIT numbers and what they are, and also what our programming is doing in order to help us move towards functional zero. So I think that the conversations that you all are having are right in terms of setting a next step on the data practices that we have, knowing that we had a good starting place with what we had, and it's time to take that next step so that we can do better in responding to the actual landscape that we're in to getting to functional zero.
ETA?
Well, first of all, I hope that we end up in a good place with the conversations that you're having. I think you're moving in the right direction. It's clear that we need to have more access to data. We need to have the ability to evaluate programming and results, as well as to monitor the work that is happening in the county. And I think this is the nature of the place that you are exploring right now. And I'm very optimistic that we'll get to where we need to be.
And I'll just mention that I did sign the data sharing agreement with all 3 counties last week. And so it's making its way through their process on the county end. So that milestone is right there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next up, Counselor Gonzalez, then Rosenthal. Thanks, Counselor. I think I welcome the opportunity for more of like a dialogue. So I want to build off of and also share some of my thoughts on what Counselor Nolan mentioned. I think there were two main pieces. One is like the inflow outflow functional zero, and the other is cost-effective services. And I think I'm really curious to see how in the data sharing agreements we find a way to do that like appropriately, because I think we can acknowledge that folks that have the highest barriers or have been living outside the longest are going to be more expensive to serve because they have the highest needs. And so I don't want to apply inappropriate pressure into saying, show me the best bang for the buck if it means that the hardest people to serve continue to be excluded from the services. So I think I think that's like a caveat that I want to add there in terms of that. And we need the data to do that. So Marisa, thank you for highlighting again that we are moving in that direction to get that data. I think everyone on the council would agree that it's been an excruciating amount of time for 3-4 years of the measure to pass for us to get here, but we're finally there. So that is something that I want to highlight and acknowledge, and I think that we do have interest in. And also, I do think in some conversations I've had with some business leaders, some that can be optimistic about our work, others that are maybe more critical and frustrated. I think also making sure that there is not a bar being set that is impossible to clear, because we can work towards functional zero and do that. But I think setting some kind of anyway, there's more conversation to have around that. And what is achievable and what is a meaningful thing that we can do. And I think in the rare, brief, and non-reoccurring is where our sweet sauce is. Anyway, that's kind of like some thoughts on that. And I think on the first thought, as Marisa, you were talking about, like, why do we have the 10 to 15, right? Like, why does that ratio exist? What is the primary cause of homelessness? The cost of housing, right? Like, that is the primary cost. I was like reading another report, and I'll get to these reports, I promise. That like last year, the city of Portland built less than 1,000 units last year. That is crazy in a housing emergency. And I think the city of Portland has some of the best data available, which is why it's easy to reference that. I don't know what it looks like region wide when we're supposed to be building 10,000 units a year, hopefully here in the city, right? To meet our goals. That is a huge problem. And we need to be able to talk about that too in the context of this work. And frankly, like we've been trying to, we spent the last 2 years working on an urban growth process to add a few thousand units at the edge of the region. And, like there's now legal challenges and questions. I mean, like, guys, we need to build housing, right? And so I think like that needs to be a really clear component of this work. And the mission of this measure is not to fix all of the housing continuum. And I want to stay focused on that. So anyway, just again, for the spirit of dialogue and conversation, like our North Star of housing, and we do have regional housing production work that's kicking off. Really looking forward to that. But there is a big conversation that needs to happen there, in my opinion, around what our role is as Metro in really accelerating housing production. So without that, I mean, that is where I think the counties really need Metro to have a leadership role as well. And for our region to be really clear down in Salem about what are all the buckets of funding that we need for each stage of the continuum to address this, to address the issues. All right, off my soapbox. With the reports as we are reading them, they all talked to a degree of the complications in federal funding and the forecasts not reaching the levels. And just in general, the kind of the tension of scaling down while maintaining the vigor and intensity. What have those conversations been like on the staff to staff level, or the regional tables or oversight committees, in terms of how this measure is continuing to optimize itself and be realistic in this time of so much federal uncertainty, with HUD as a partner, and with other sources of their funding that, you know, if President Peterson was here, would mention that we're not quite sure how that perfectly fits in with our funding. And so as one of the primary funders of the homelessness services system in the greater Portland region, how are we making decisions about spending priorities with all these other buckets of funds that our county partners also need to balance and weigh and maybe not have the full clarity on?
Yeah, I can certainly get that started. So in December, I'll speak to the oversight committee and a little bit of the work happening there. In December, we had our colleagues join us our finance colleagues join us to provide the oversight committee with an update in terms of the forecast and where we were headed with that. And that did prompt the oversight committee to start asking some of these questions, and how are the counties engaging and planning for their fiscal year 26 budgets. I mean, I think at that point in time, some of the incredible leaders that were here at the beginning of the SHS and thinking through the volatility of this funding source, that's why there were things put in place like contingency and stabilization reserves. So the counties are actually joining this next oversight committee meeting at the end of March to discuss, hey, now that you've had some time to sit with the information and we have these accounts that were designed exactly for this purpose, how are you planning on engaging with them? There is also additional conversations happening at the tri-county planning level, where the counties have made a request to dip into the regional investment fund, the carryover from the first 3 years, to support with some of these reductions that they have seen. I will also just note that the first kind of phase of SHS, the first years 1 through 3, those were always intended to be a buildup of programming. Mm-hmm. And given that the core programming here was permanent supportive housing, we knew that would take longer to support and build up. So there was a lot of short-term investments that happened year 1 through year 3 with SHS, things that you've heard of before, like eviction prevention, rapid rehousing, these one-time costs that were leveraged with these carryover dollars. That is also part of the discussion right now. So it's all of these contextual things that are coming up around less funding, but also as we are shifting into this year 4, year 5, this middle ground for SHS, how do we ramp down some of these carryover investments that were intended to be one time, and that was the way that they were set up to be. Add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you for that. Agreed. And it's a really important context for the nature of this moment. If I understand your question correctly,
yeah, of course,
is the impact of federal administration potential cuts onto the system. Am I understanding your question correctly? Okay. And so one of your questions was, how are we making funding decisions? And as you know, like most of those funding decisions are being made at the county level.
Yep.
So county boards are approving those budgets and inherently making those priority decisions at that level. For us, however, as the funder of a regional system of care, which is the goal, we have to pay attention to the funding sources that are coming into our system. And we have reporting tools as well as IGA agreements that essentially have us looking at, if you're going to face a reduction, you need to let us know. Whether you're pulling funding, they're not supposed to touch the general fund that are feeding these programs. But additionally, if there is a significant shift in their funding landscape, because these are braided resources. So as an example, the federal government is funding them directly, but it's also coming through the state. So you have different levels of dollars that are coming in that we do need to be able to track and talk about actively for the next foreseeable future of this administration to make sure that we are prepared for the impacts of cuts on our communities. So there's the cuts directly to county and jurisdictions that are feeding the county in terms of funding, but there's also then the impacts on providers, which has already begun to be felt. So we have to utilize our structure that we have now with the Oversight Committee, with Tri-County Planning Body, have these conversations where we are eyes wide open about the impacts of current events at the federal level, so that we are at least providing guidance wherever we can and raising where there are significant risks to the goals that we have of addressing homelessness in our region. So we'll have to make sure that we're intentional around asking that question every time we have Oversight Committee meetings, et cetera, because things will change quickly and we'll need to work together closely to be able to track the impact.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm super interested, as I know we have a lot of check-ins with y'all, and
Yeah.
as the work progresses, for these updates to also include some themes that we're seeing evolving in the system as our federal government either invests, not invests, disrupts funding, and what implications that has for the counties who, I mean, they don't just receive funds from us, we're partners with them and trying to respond. So I would love to see that included in our reports moving forward, especially over these next few years. And kind of secondly, I talked with President Peterson about this, but one of the reasons that I'm super excited about a potential H2PAC model is that I think our region for decades has been, we've been able to punch above our weight on transportation for JPAC in terms of the way that our region really advocates in Salem and in DC for our projects and our priorities. And I mean, there's multiple reasons for that, right? But I would like for us to have the same level of intensity and alignment when we go to DC and when we go to Salem about what are our expectations for the system as one of the primary funders of this system. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of being able to speak with one voice. Clearly, we're still figuring a lot of things out in this partnership, but I want to put that marker out there that I think when we get to that stage, we'll be able to be more effective and also really serve as the lightning rod of the region in terms of this highly flexible, impactful funding that we have to support folks. And I'm sure our partners at the state level would also love to see some alignment from us as a region in terms of how we work together going forward. So, great. Thanks, Deputy President.
All right, Councilor Rosenthal and Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. There's a lot to unpack here. It's a complicated process and there's a lot of ways to look at it. I'm just thinking of a forum I attended last week where there were 3 representatives of service providers, and none of them seemed to have any significant understanding of the process that we're engaged in or of Metro's role in the process. They seem to focus primarily on the state and the federal government. It was rather disappointing to me because I asked what Metro can do, and there was no answer other than that we should not build congregate shelters, which we don't do anyhow. But so I think we have a lot of education that we need to do. That's first one comment. Second of all, I think I was looking at the staff report, and I think we need to be a little bit more bold. We have a phrase in there that says that we will convene and coordinate long-term regional solutions. I think our role is a lot more important than that. I think we have to define and and create long-term regional solutions. I think that's the role that we've taken. We're the source of funding. I mean, we can't really trust on the federal government at this point, not only the HUD funding, but also the reduction on Medicaid funding. $880 million is probably going to be cut from Medicaid funding. So we are the ones who are going to have to define what this regional system is going to look like. So I think we need to be a little bit more bold about that and say that. Now, I have two particular questions. One question is, and this is sort of an area of frustration for me, we keep talking about North Star. North Star doesn't mean anything. I mean, it could be Southern Cross for all we talk about. When and who is going to define what this North Star is? We have the HUD definition and we have a list of bullets. And that's my second question on the bullets, that is that the North Star, or are we defining something else? When are we going to do the North Star and who's going to define it? And then on the bullets, it seems that we do not have a bullet that says we're going to try and develop a system that provides services to the various different communities that have special needs, such as seniors, such as people with disabilities, such as people who have substance abuse. We don't have that specifically in there. We have racial equity, which is great, but we don't have an adaptive system that really responds to a lot of specific needs. So my two questions are, who and when is going to define what the North Star is? Because the sooner we do that, the sooner we can work on common goals. And secondly, why do we not have a bullet that really addresses some of the specific needs? And I mentioned that about shelters. We have different shelters. Shelters have very different uses. There's congregate shelters for emergencies. There's shelters for people who have, you might say, abuse issues. There's shelters for youth who have home reference issues. So I think we need to expand that bullet list. And I think I'd like to hear more about what we think about this North Star that I keep hearing about.
If I can, because we talked about that last night at the President's Work Group on housing. And that question came up a lot from a couple of folks, but defining it was the path that we were on, and no definitions were laid out, but the idea around what the North Star is. And I think that we started to go down that journey just a little bit, but it's really the system and what's the continuum of care and how is that established? And there's more conversation that is going to continue to go on. I think I'm correct, in June is the next work group conversation. But it's up to us here in the region to define what that North Star is. And it's up to us to really tweak this system and shift it back into the space that we had hoped it would have been in, today, 5 years ago when we planned it out. So, yeah, that was the meat of the conversation last night, at least on the North Star part. I'll let y'all answer the other piece.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Simpson. On the second part of your question, in terms of populations, as you well know, we have population A and B breakouts. And you're absolutely right that within those populations, you have folks that are identifying as chronically homeless, you have seniors, you have youth, you have family, domestic violence that you mentioned earlier. There's several subcategories of populations that we can certainly explore if we need to have more definition, calling out specific populations. But I can say that I do know that counties are prioritizing certain populations. So seniors have been a priority from the beginning. We know that several of the households at the very beginning and that are still being supported by SHS, PSH resources are senior households who were losing their Metro 300 funding, as an example. And we know that the population 55 and older is the fastest growing population that we're seeing in our community, which is really disturbing. We know that we have an opportunity, and we also have I'll just say an obligation to make sure that we are seeing what high-risk populations are emerging in our community and developing strategies and prioritizing explicitly to support those communities. So I appreciate your naming that. Essentially, we're kind of vague right now, and we should be more specific about populations that we're serving, because that might also indicate how those populations are served, if I am understanding your comment correctly.
Well, my question is, my feeling is we need a bullet that specifically says this.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a bullet that says this. I mean, because that's going to be part of the North Star to me. And I appreciate Counselor Simpson saying that that's something I was not at that meeting. So the sooner we can come with this North Star, I think the clearer it will be going forward.
Yeah, and I do want to put a point on, there were some examples given at the meeting last night. And there was one clear piece for the regions that were doing successful, one of which was my hometown, Houston. I'm gonna name that. They had a clear system of communication, in real-time communication. So that meant that like the data that Marisa just agreement just signed and got, you know, codified, we can now build on and create a system of our own in real time. So if there's an issue out in one part of the region and it's at capacity and there's another part of the region that can accept that individual, in other parts of the country, they're arranging transport and moving that person to the part of the region where they can receive help, right? That's what I would like for us to get to, and part of the conversation, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, is kind of like, what is that system and what does it look like, and how does it work how do we work in that system, or how do our partners work with our nonprofits and our service providers in that system? One, to reduce lag times in terms of getting folks the services they need. They shouldn't have to like have a poverty passport to prove that they're poor or all of those things, but also, you know, just making sure that the system overall is communicating and functioning as an ecosystem as one. So, yeah. Councilor Wong.
Great. Thank you, Deputy President. You know, for my low soapbox moment, and you know, I started this line of thought last time at the last work session. But I do really believe that we need to get to functional zero. But this particular measure and funding stream is only part of the toolbox, right? And you know, with 15 in and 10 out, we're not even like treading water. So I would really like to have a plan of like what it would take to get there outside of this measure with all the tools that we might have available regionally and statewide. Because I think absent a coordinated plan, we're always going to be in this situation. And I'm thinking ahead to 2040, if we have this, you know, 15-10, it's, you know, we're going to be worse off, right? And I think part of the challenge is that we set this up in the public consciousness where this measure is the be all end all, and it will never be that. And, you know, I just don't believe we can service our way out of homelessness. This is the most expensive time to intervene to move someone from out of homelessness, you know, to home. So, you know, just carrying on Councilor Nolan and Councilor Gonzalez's thinking, but we need to look at the entirety of a toolbox to really, you know, be able to have a plan to get to functional zero. And I don't know how to create that plan, but like I don't think we're actually going to be able to get the efficiencies in programs and spending to really bend that curve on its own. Like we need to be talking about housing production. We need to talk about economic development. Like the situation that we're in is a symptom of like this underinvestment in our social safety net for decades, and we can't turn that around. But like, you know, this $200 million a year or whatever for a region is not the level that will get us to functional zero. That's my take. So like, what is it that what else do we need to do in conjunction to have that plan to get to zero? I don't know if that's like a work group is talking about that, because I think when we have these committees, we're really focused on SHS, which is really important because we need this to work, you know, as effectively as it can. But like, where is a space where we actually can have a conversation about what is it going to take to get to functional zero? So I don't know if anyone has any ideas.
Well, no, what you brought up also came up last night.
Yeah.
What are the other pieces of the system that need to be a part of the conversation?
Right.
I I believe that, and Director Rojas, I don't know the lineup of who's coming, but we have folks coming from Medicare or,
Bring-
Sure.
Yeah, health share and like, so the health systems,
Yes.
it's been raised to bring in some folks to,
And do we see that as our responsibility to come up with this like strategy that layers things together, or like whose responsibility is that? I think we can take leadership in that, but it requires buy-in from a lot of stakeholders and a recognition that we are all kind of like fighting over this one pot of money when we all know that's not going to go as far as we need. So we need to get creative and layering in a total response system.
absolutely. I'll respond to your question or just to your comment. I do think that this is, in agreement with Councilor Simpson, the conversation that is being had about North Star and what we're trying to accomplish, I think it has to be, the question is being asked within the context of other resources and other partners and other systems in the community, so that we're not in a vacuum. We're not isolated in this effort. And I think to your point, if we are going to identify that, rare, brief, non-recurring, whatever the North Star is, to get there, we have to take into account the entire landscape and the entire board of resources and funding sources. So both partners and funding sources. And so who needs to be part of those conversations matter. And I'm beginning to hear that in the president's work group being raised, of bringing other system partners in.
So you're saying the president's work group is like a proto body for that kind of conversation, but we
Yeah,
actually need to have that
It's coming up,
conversation.
yeah. It's being
Okay.
raised.
Question for RJ probably. Given county shortfalls, particularly at the county, I was just reading in the press that at least at Multnomah County, they were finding SHS dollars being used outside the joint office in various places. I saw like there was a $2.4 million allocation to the Department of Justice at Multnomah County. And I'm wondering what the budget process looks like there for us, because my understanding was our dollars flowed predominantly, almost entirely, to the joint office, but that wasn't the case in the press. So like, do we have any line of sight into that budgeting process, and like, why was there money for the Justice Department?
I can hop in here and then. Yeah, I can hop in. And so the county is the primary recipient, so the joint office is the primary deliverer of SHS dollars for Multnomah County. And as you might be aware, they also subcontract out. So whether that be to providers or they're issuing money to other departments, which was a decision that the joint office made in 2021 and has been funding other departments ever since, to the extent that those departments are serving populations A and B. And so that is how those programs were developed with the health department, for example, or Department of County Justice, where folks might be, for example, leaving, some type of incarceration setting and need a place to go. And so like the intent was in Multnomah County was to try to find those nexus areas where other systems in the county are also serving populations A and B. That said, in their budget process, these would be you'd have to look through these in the program offers in their budget processes where we would find these dollars. And it is important that we are gathering that type of information in advance too. I think it's important that we have context for where SHS dollars are going in other parts of the county and understanding why. So that's as far as I know from my experience, both at the joint office and since my time here at Metro.
So you're saying we tell a specific county, here is your allocation for the year, and then they create a budget and then tell us, but we don't have specific line items. So we
Correct.
don't know, oh, this is going to corrections.
They do show program categories, but within those categories, like who they would subcontract to, that is not there.
And subcontracted being internally or?
No, to the
System.
CBOs
Okay.
Or internally.
or internal. Okay.
Or internally, okay.
Yeah.
Councilor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Chair. Counselor Huang's question prompted something else. There's a bill in front of the legislature right now that would provide health services to people who are incarcerated but about ready to be released within 90 days. What are our limitations in terms of providing someone you might call supportive services? Because when people are going to be released, they often have very few resources and a lot of negatives going on in their situation, hard to get jobs, hard to find housing and so forth. Are we limited in that the services we can provide while they're still incarcerated, or do we have to wait until they actually hit the streets?
That is a very good question. I think we can ask our county partners what their current practices are. I don't know that there are any strong limitations, and I'll just say that there are funding sources that are better designed for different settings with particular populations. And so it's important for us to understand how the counties each are using those dollars in those various funding streams for populations. And in our work plan that you approved in 2021, I believe it was, or 2020, excuse me, we do in the population A definition incorporate people leaving institutional settings, which this would qualify for. So I think that there is an intentional effort, particularly in Multnomah County, to identify who is at the intersection of multiple systems that SHS can serve. So they are trying to find those populations before they would be, for example, leave an institutional setting and find themselves entering homelessness. Instead, the idea is to try to intervene before they exit that institutional setting and get them into some sort of service or having some kind of housing option for that individual.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Nodding.
On the budgeting. Like in a new system, would we get more clarity on where specific dollars flow? Because if I were the city of Portland, for example, and we had the joint office, and the county is taking resources away from a joint office that we both kind of, provide guidance and oversight for, like that money is coming off the top before it goes to a joint office. So like, where those conversations happen about where, what goes to joint office and what goes to other county departments?
Council President, I think Councilor Huang, you're kind of narrowing in on the difference between transparency and like being able to see how money is being spent and where it's going and for what, and the information being available. So, you can go to the county's program offers and spend a lot of time reading and trying to, see where different buckets of money are going. But that's very different than having a transparent process where, the expectation is, however you get there, we fully understand what our investment is doing. And it continues to be one of the reasons why I'm so excited about all the conversations that you're happening, because it shouldn't be this hard. And I think there's a lot of improvement that we can have in that realm of transparency and understanding where is this money going and how is it working.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks. Kind of have it's a kind of a budget question, but kind of like a dream scenario. And it's highly, considering how hard it's been to even get to ramping up our program, how hard it might be to do this, but I'm envisioning how great it would be to be able to have like a report to the voters and say, this is how we are spending our SHS money, our state money, our federal money on this issue. But here's also how cities are deploying some of their general fund, or like this is the full picture of the homeless response. Because and we can let our partner, the cities or the county or whoever is doing something, quantify that. For example, in my district, I know THPRD, they've waived all SDCs to build affordable housing in PSH since 2018, which has cost them millions and millions and millions of dollars to their general fund. That should be celebrated and should be recognized as a contribution to the mission of this measure and to the housing bond. Also, obviously the city of Portland has had multiple investments in terms of, I don't know the name of the programs, but like the cleanup programs and different community response programs. And I think I would love as Juan Carlos, as an individual, but also as a Metro councilor, the ability to tell that full story to people about how we're doing that. But then also again, kind of coming back to some of my original comments around the housing continuum and beginning to like put those things together around housing production, immediate response to homelessness, serving folks with high acuity. And like, if Metro is not the organization to do that, I do not know who is in this region, frankly, because with SHS, we are the government that does all of those things. And anyway, I would love to get there. And I know that we've been working on like basic things like data sharing agreements and other basic things that getting there might be a challenge, but I do want to keep an aspirational element. And in my conversations with many of you in private in our housing staff, I know that you aspire for something very similar. So I want to just keep putting that out into the universe, and whatever we can do to help would be great. So.
Seeing no other comments, I want to thank Yesenia, RJ, and Director Rojas for your Q1 and Q2 update. Looking forward to Q3. Hopefully everything starts to balance out a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next item, Expo Future Quarterly Update. We are now joined by our Expo Future team who are here to provide a quarterly status update on phase 3 of the project. We will also hear an overview of our upcoming public-private development partnership workshop in April. I would love to welcome Craig Stroud, General Manager of Visitor Venues, and Stephanie Redmond, Expo Future Project Manager. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back to you. Councilors, we're here to provide you with an update on the progress of the Expo Futures project. Craig Stroud, General Manager of Visitor Venues. Before we do that, we want to offer context on the project for those in the audience that may not be familiar. Next slide, please. So as you recall, in January, Metro Council and the Metropolitan Exposition Recreation Commission affirmed the 2 key project objectives noted on this slide, which were to first, meaningfully memorialize the histories and cultures of the site, and second, to pivot Expo to a destination that prioritizes sports uses and sports tourism while continuing to host traditional expositions and legacy events. Next slide, please. Over the past 2 months, the project team has worked to close out phase 2 and structure what we're referring to as phase 3 work. Stephanie is going to recap the representation and memorialization work. I'll follow up with the sports redevelopment work, and then we'll update you on some administrative work. At that point, or even during the presentation today, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Stephanie?
Thanks, Craig. Good morning, councilors. Pleasure to be with you, Stephanie Redmond, she or they pronouns, project manager for the Expo Future project. I'd like to talk with you this morning first about the work of representing and memorializing the histories and cultures associated with the Expo Center site. And that focuses primarily on tribes and indigenous Japanese American and Vanport communities. Your adoption of Resolution 25-5450 in January of this year defined the major representation and memorialization activities for phase 3 of the Expo Future project. And these include assessing the feasibility of the Historical Significance and Memorialization Committee's recommendations for representing and memorializing the histories and cultures of the site, and developing an implementation strategy for recommendations that are deemed to be feasible from those 46 that were provided, conducting a cultural resources assessment of the Expo site, conducting an engineering study of Hall A's integrity and its capacity for reuse in the Expo Future vision, sharing the Hall A engineering findings with impacted communities and collaborating with them to develop recommendations for the future use or potential deconstruction of Hall A, engaging tribes in representation and memorialization work in partnership with Metro's Tribal Affairs team. And last, identifying an approach to governance and engagement for the development of a site interpretive plan and working to develop that plan, which would define the what, where, and how of representation and memorialization features throughout the site. Next slide, please. Staff's significant activities in the area of representation and memorialization year-to-date in 2025 have focused primarily on closeout of Phase 2 work, as Craig mentioned, in planning and preparation for Phase 3. Since January, project staff have established timelines for major Phase 3 representation and memorialization activities, developed cost estimates for representation and memorialization activities, and we are developing a scope of work for the cultural resources assessment, are working on developing tribal engagement approach in partnership with tribal affairs staff, and are tabulating, are beginning to frame Hall 8 engineering study, the scope of work for that. And we are working to tabulate North Portland neighbors' online input, which was received in December. Craig's now going to update you on the sports redevelopment activities. Next slide, and over to Craig.
So councilors, as a reminder, your adoption of resolution 25-5451 in January defined the major sports redevelopment activities of Phase 3 for the project. These include continued analysis and refinement of the preferred sports scenario, proposing interim investments in sports equipment for Halls D and E to attract more volleyball and basketball and flat floor sports to Expo in the near term, and finally, developing and presenting the criteria for solicitation of a public-private partnership by June 30th of this year as a possible path to site redevelopment. Next slide, please. Since January, staff have established dependencies and timelines for Phase 3 activities, developed cost estimates for near-term installation of volleyball and basketball courts, sports equipment for Halls D and E, very high level of cost estimates there, continued researching public-private partnership best practices, and we are planning and preparing for an April 3rd public-private partnership workshop, which I'll describe in a moment. So we are preparing for the public-private partnership marketplace and conference in mid-April. The marketplace is part of a national conference on public-private partnerships for infrastructure development. Chief Financial Officer Brian Kennedy, Project Manager Paul Slyman, and I will all be in attendance at that workshop. In addition to attending the sessions, Metro will have a table at the marketplace, which provides us the opportunity to interact with private developers and to get initial feedback on our project concept. We'll use this input to shape the P3 criteria that will be presented to you later this year. Next slide, please. And I want to share additional information about the April 3rd workshop on public-private partnerships, or P3, with counselors' directive to staff to present criteria for a P3 by the end of June. It's important that we have a common understanding of these partnerships and the range of options on how they work. This is really the first foundational step for development of the P3 development criteria, which you've requested. Staff is working with the leading experts in public-private partnerships for public infrastructure to bring a workshop to Metro to give us shared foundational understanding of the tool and its processes. The workshop is scheduled for Thursday, April 3rd, here in council chambers from 10:30 to 3 with a working lunch. Topics will include the business case for a P3, keys to successful project marketing, best practices in structuring the deal and allocating risk, tips to select advisors and partners to support the process. And finally, we've sent out invitations last week to council and a range of stakeholders, and we're hopeful to see many of you there. Please RSVP if you haven't already done so. The workshop will be presented by the Association for the Improvement of American Infrastructure, AIAI is their acronym, and they're excited to share their knowledge with us. If you cannot be in physical attendance, there is a virtual option. And if you can't prioritize, or if you're not able to make the entire workshop, we would suggest you try to prioritize the morning session as the most important for participation. Again, that's on April 3rd, and we hope you can attend. Next slide.
Thanks, Greg. There is, of course, always less glamorous project administrative work that happens behind the scenes to advance this project. And we'd like to share some of the high points of that with you as well. In the last few months, staff have prepared and submitted a proposed project budget for next fiscal year to COO Madrigal. We've invited project feedback from phase 2 committees to inform the project evaluation report. We've updated Expo Futures project sponsorship procedures and responded to 33 project inquiries from the public that were submitted after the Expo Future Vision was presented to Council and Merck last December. And last, we've continued production of the project monthly e-newsletter. I'm happy to report that newsletter subscribers have nearly doubled in the last year and now number 1,422 with close to a 48% open rate. So lots of interest on the project, which is exciting. Next slide, please. Looking forward to the next quarter, final quarter of this fiscal year. Our key activities in the next quarter will include the P3 workshop on Thursday, April 3rd, as Craig mentioned, securing a contractor for the cultural resources assessment of Expo, securing an engineer for initial assessment of Hall A, finalizing the project governance structure, developing a work plan for next fiscal year based on the COO's proposed project budget, and finishing tribal engagement planning with our tribal affairs team. Craig?
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you, Stephanie. And counselors, thank you for your time and attention. That concludes our formal presentation. We're now happy to answer any questions or take any feedback that you have for us.
Counselors, questions, comments? Counselor Wong, Counselor Rosenthal, and then Counselor Gonzalez.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy President. Thanks for our progress report. Seems like things are on track. I do have a question around the near-term acquisition of basketball and volleyball equipment. And I understand we've actually been having kind of those tournaments already. So what does the purchase of this equipment add that we don't have access to or have already? And how does that set us up for the future?
Sure. Counselor Wong, so you're correct in that we do have tournaments that come in and either rent or have their own owned equipment, and they will transition the halls for that purpose and use, and then that equipment goes away. The challenge with that is that one of the aspects of the resolution was to try to pivot to the larger vision of local youth and adult usage, particularly weekday. And without owning the equipment or having access to the equipment, that offering is going to be particularly challenging. So in response to the resolution action to look to the short-term pivot, we're exploring how we can acquire some of the infrastructure needed so that we can begin that activity now while the larger redevelopment conversation runs in parallel.
And is the plan for us to run our own tournaments or just subcontract that out or allow youth sports organizations to rent the facility but with the equipment there?
Yeah, Councilor Wong, I think that all of those options are potentially on the table, and it'll be a series of iterative steps to try to define what that looks like. The intent would not be for us necessarily to run our own tournaments. We wouldn't necessarily see those. We would be partnering with local organizations that have interest and already have the capacities to bring forth that type of business from that activity.
And what's the scale of the purchase?
It could be multiple millions of dollars.
Oh, wow.
And we're truly in a feasibility stage. Halls D and E, they were built for exposition, which means they're flat floor. They have the ceiling height requirements, but they have floor boxes where power and utilities come up to feed that exposition activity. And those floor boxes are a real challenge for flat court sports like basketball. The balls bounce differently when they hit that. So figuring out, there are solutions to that. The range of solutions, though, come with complications. Some, if it's fixed flooring that comes in, sheets that need to be connected, your turn time and your labor to install, remove, the degradation of the material itself, it only has so many uses where you can do that before it needs to be replaced. There's other roll solutions, there's applied solutions, where it's like an epoxy, but they all come with different pros and cons. But our biggest stumbling point at this moment is those floor boxes, honestly. So we're engaging, in addition to the Hall A engineering study on feasibility of that structure standing alone, we're engaging architectural and engineering study from experts in sports for how we could lay out service legacy needs, while at the same time getting a cost attractive solution for an interim sports investment to get that public usage in there as quickly as possible.
And is there like I'm sure there's a financial feasibility plan. I mean, if we're gonna
That will come
redevelop
with that,
portions of it,
yes.
that equipment.
Yeah.
Invest, okay.
Yeah, it'll be a series of what are the options, a winnowing of those options based on, turn time, cost, durability, application, and it will winnow that down into the best option. And then that would have an associated price tag.
Okay, and that would go back to the COO for approval.
Correct. We've asked for appropriation this year to have money available as we do this planning work. If we get to that point where we think we've got the solution, there's it's a relatively small amount of money in the overall phase of things.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, I guess. I mean, volleyball and basketball are great. Have we looked, or are we excluding other indoor sports such as wrestling, martial arts tournaments, even indoor tennis and things like that? Where, I mean, I'm assuming we can't easily adapt to handball. That's, as you know, that's a very popular sport in Oregon. And there's a big tournament going on, I guess, either soon. But are any other sports being considered?
I would say no sports are being excluded. Let's start there. Like 2 weeks ago, Expo had a karate tournament. So we're still bringing in that type of tournament activity, and we expect to continue that into the future. This usage is slightly different, where in order to make the business case feasible and pay the overheads of opening the facility, we need relatively consistent use. And that's probably going to look like programmed youth sports for basketball, volleyball with adult and league attached Monday through Thursday when the spaces are available. But it's going to look like who can generate that regular demand and usage of the facility. We're not opposed to any of the other sports you mentioned, but we know from the research in the earlier phases of the project that basketball and volleyball are the most demand flat court sports that would generate that kind of usage now in our region. Not talking about ice rinks or those types of things, but that's why we're talking about volleyball and basketball. Is that's the greatest demand that we could put in play now.
And if I could jump in just anecdotally, right now, youth sports basketball tournaments that happen in the region happen literally all over the region,
Right.
with people driving from Clark County to Hillsborough to,
Tri-Cities.
Yep.
Exactly. So,
I just did a tournament at Tualatin High School for my boy.
oh, there you go.
Came out your way. Metro District 3.
Hmm?
Metro District 3.
What tournament was it?
It was a AAU tournament. It was one of the
Basketball.
local
Basketball.
youth basketball
Yeah.
tournament. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to a number of these, but I just was wondering about the other sports. Tennis is a big sport internationally, and it requires special facilities and a decking of a certain sort. And I'm just wondering if that's being considered. I don't know. Anyway,
Adding to the sports list, I know I've said it, I'm gonna say it again. Gaming, you gotta add esports in there. It's just growing. It's gonna continue to grow, and I think it's a good draw. So, and that's AV, it's all TVs and speakers. So, Councilor Gonzalez.
That's a great conversation. Well, first, I just want to, slightly off topic, but very on topic. Craig, I want to thank you for your leadership and stepping up. And I don't think that we've really talked about the difficult period that our venues are going through, obviously with the pandemic, with bookings, the economy. I mean, just venues in general are it's a challenging time. And for you and your team, your leadership team, the people around you and rallying around this, I just really want to thank you and appreciate that because there's hard decisions around every corner, and NCO Madrigal sent an email to us and to the agency around that. And I know that you're gonna approach this with integrity, with Metro's core values. And that's important to highlight. I want to make sure that we were able to say that here. With respect to the Expo project, I mean, I've been constantly impressed our ability to carry a program forward that is ambitious on a number of fronts, both in terms of pivoting a historic facility and recognizing the history, the restorative justice, but also weaving in the tremendous opportunity for our future. I think it's just like a dream project for Metro. And I want to thank y'all for that. I want to center basically, it's not even really a question just because I track this really closely, but I think the approach of the kind of like the proof of concept, the kind of this pilot kind of, we have the facility, we have the ability to do that. And this activity is already happening dispersed around the region. I think because we're looking at potential public-private models and wanting to see how private investment can work with this facility, if we're able to really concentrate the economic activity and prove that that we know the market's there, the studies have shown it, but really generate beyond the insiders, right, we're us and our stakeholders, that there's a really remarkable moment here. It could be great. So I fully support that. And, you know, whether it's AAU basketball or pickleball or volleyball or esports, I mean, all of those things, I have confidence that we're going to work really hard to get those shows to come in, or those competitions to come in. So I think that if I had a question, it would be around like, how are you approaching the retraining or training of our staff to be able to make a strong case to these event organizers that we're the right facility for them going forward? So, I mean, what elements of like brain and program shift have to happen internally for us to set ourselves up as a recipient of business for this essentially like kind of new line of business that we're doing? So I'm just kind of curious about what you're thinking about that, how you're approaching that, and how we're being lean with our resources to be really competitive out there. So I'm just kind of curious to hear what you're thinking about that. And aside from that, great work.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. Thank you for the kind words right out the gate. Well, the good news is that this is not new activity for Expo or the convention center. We've long history of hosting sporting events, from fencing to rodeo to karate to pickleball. I mean, so the tournament aspect has long been in our wheelhouse. We've got regional partners with Sport Oregon and Travel Portland that support and assist us. Sometimes it's even the Blazers and the Moda Center and others, depending on the sport. So it's not new. The difference, I think, is that the new is Monday through Thursday local use and activity. That is not something that we have particular strength in. And so we need to develop the partnerships. And I had a conversation with Matt Reed, the CEO of Sport Oregon, last week around who in our region is best equipped to help us figure out how to approach, manage, and get into a relationship for groups that do those activities. I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for us to go try to reinvent that model. Clearly, there's success across the nation in this. So we're gonna tap our regional and local stakeholders, see what solutions look like. But to me, that's the fundamental difference. And then as far as like I think there's two parts to your question. One is that local usage, and we really need to come up with a way to take the facility and be able to pivot the facility. Mm-hmm. Again, it's that magic that happens overnight where it looks like a basketball court arena one day, the next day it looks like the RV show. Yeah. That's the magic of venues. And we have to figure out how to come at the infrastructure solutions in a way that's cost feasible. If we don't, what looks like Monday through Thursday activity ends up being a lot of blackout dates. And so it's hard for then participants to get rhythm on their own programming. So there's magic in how we marry those two concepts up. But as far as how do we sell the sizzle, we're doing that now already to bring in those outside tournaments. The focus on youth local sports and adult local, that's a little different, and that's the approach we'll take.
Great. Thank you for interpreting my question correctly, because I think that's exactly the kind of answer I was looking for. And it's great to hear some of those challenges logistically. And you're right, venues do have a magic of like, you know, I'm sure I've always been fascinated by like how the Moda Center could have a concert for like Bad Bunny and then a Blazers game the next day. That's like crazy, especially with all whatever. There's a lot of magic that goes in there. So thank you for that. And I know the council is super interested in continuing to see that. So encourage you to continue sharing with us like, hey, we've just booked this major tournament. We're going to have this. I mean, those kind of things in a news environment for our region, especially where tourism and activity, like obviously the vibes feel low in terms of that. Those little nuggets I think could be sparks for being like, look at this direction, look at this momentum, look at this engine beginning to fire on all cylinders again. I think it could be really great. So please keep sending us information materials.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal.
Just a quick, I want to support what Councilor Gonzalez says. Thank you, Craig, for all the work you're doing. And I also want to have a shout out for Matthew Rochford and his crew out there that have been, that are amazingly wizards at transforming that facility space in short notice and squeezing huge RVs in and then boats and then, you know, all sorts of other things going on. So I think we have a great staff. They're going to be pressed this next year because of economic difficulties, but they have a great deal of skill. And so thank you and Matthew.
Thank you. Well, seeing no other comments, I want to thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, but thank you to all of our venue staff for the work that they do out on the front lines. And thank you for this update. We're looking forward to it actually happening. So thank you.
Thank you.
With that, moving on to Chief Operating Officer Communications, COO Madrigal.
Thank you, Deputy Council President. Just wanted to give a brief plug for the Employee Wellness Fair next Wednesday, March 19th from 10 to 2 here in this building at the MRC. The Human Resources team will be offering a variety of resources centered around improving physical, emotional, and financial well-being. This includes representatives from partner organizations like Kaiser, Regions Blue Cross, Canopy, Mission Square, Home Street Bank, and TriMet. A Metro Park Ranger to offer advice on recreating at Metro's parks, ergonomics and emergency preparedness resources from our risk and safety team, 3 to 5 minute chair massages. Get the mental health, a little nervous system imbalance there, raffles, and most exciting therapy dogs from Pause for Love. It should definitely be worth stopping by and taking advantage of some of the resources that are available. It's a difficult time out there, so really encourage people to attend. Employees are invited to attend on paid time. So check in with your supervisor to coordinate your attendance if you're interested in stopping by. Thank you.
No 90-minute massages?
No 90 minutes.
Oh.
Just a little, just to break the tension a little.
Okay. Councilor Communications. Councilors. Councilor Rosenthal.
There was an important meeting last Friday morning. Councilor Wong and I and President Peterson were there. That was the economic headwinds are particularly bad. Portland is not in the best possible place. There were some off ramps presented for how we can move forward, but there was a lot of data presented by the Portland Chamber. Perhaps Councilor Wong had a question about how we move forward, and I think there was a lot of discussion as to how that's forward. It's interesting that we have two of the particular headwinds. One is that we're unique in the country and that we have a very great discrepancy between Multnomah County, Washington, Clackamas counties, and Clark County. Clark County seems to be where people are moving, and yet the jobs are still here. And the other thing is we're very unique in that our economy in Oregon is dominated by a single tech industry, which is very unusual. Most of the South is dominated by Walmart, which is also another peculiarity. We're not dominated by Walmart, so maybe we need a lot of Walmart stars. I don't know. Anyway, it was an interesting meeting with a lot to think about.
Thank you. And just a quick update. I know I spoke about it during one of our first topic, but last night was the President's Work Group for Supportive Housing Services. We had a good turnout from across the region, mayors, commissioners, service providers, community leaders. It was a good conversation. It was one that was, I think, moving in the right direction of where we would like to see that measure operate. And there will be more to come. And I have requested that staff provide the rest of the council the example cities that were used in that so that you guys can get up to speed and to provide you all a quick update on how these meetings have been progressing. So that's my update to you all. Any others? Seeing none, the council work session is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March 13th, 2025 at 10:30 a.m.